Top 10 Nazi Collaborators Who Were Jews. Welcome to Creepshow, where we explore the darkest and most unexpected corners of history. The Holocaust is one of humanity's most horrifying chapters, and while the Nazis were the primary architects of this genocide, their mission was often enabled by collaborators, some of whom were Jews. These stories are complex, tragic, and deeply unsettling, forcing us to confront the blurred lines of morality and survival in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Today, we bring you Top 10 Nazi Collaborators Who Were Jews, stories of individuals who, through fear, coercion, or choice, worked under the Nazi regime. These tales are not just about betrayal, but also about the impossible choices and moral dilemmas that many faced during one of the darkest periods in history. Number 10. Kalal Pernik. Our first story is one of sorrow, self-loathing, and haunting regret. Kalal Pernik, a Polish Jew from the town of Otwock, was a man caught in the cruel grip of desperation and deception. Born into a modest Jewish family, Pernik lived through the Nazi invasion of Poland and found himself forced into the Otwock ghetto along with his wife and daughter. In 1941, Pernik made a decision that would define the rest of his short life. He joined the Jewish ghetto police, a force tasked with maintaining order within the ghetto under Nazi oversight. Like many who joined, Pernik believed that his cooperation might shield his family from the horrors of deportation to the death camps. As a ghetto policeman, he also received slightly better rations, a cruel but practical incentive for many who were starving and desperate. But this perceived safety came at a devastating cost. The Jewish ghetto police were often required to assist in rounding up their own people for deportation, and Pernik quickly found himself a participant in these operations. It wasn't long before he realized that his actions were contributing directly to the machinery of the Holocaust. In a tragic twist, Pernik's hopes of protecting his family were shattered when his wife and daughter were deported to Treblinka, a death camp where they were murdered. Racked with guilt, Pernik wrote his memoir, Am I a Murderer? Testament of a Jewish ghetto policeman, a searing confession of his complicity in the atrocities. His writing is filled with self-hatred and anger, not only at himself, but also at the Jewish people. In his despair, Pernik wrote that the Jews brought hatred upon themselves by claiming to be the chosen race, a deeply controversial statement reflecting the depth of his torment. Eventually, Pernik could no longer bear his role in the Nazi regime. He deserted the ghetto police, becoming a fugitive, but freedom was short-lived. The Nazis captured him, and he was executed, another victim of the system he once served. Pernik's story is a haunting example of the moral complexities faced by those living under Nazi rule. His memoir stands as both a confession and a desperate attempt to make sense of his actions, a reminder of how fear and survival can twist even the strongest moral compasses. Number 9. Yosef Andrei Shirinsky, the betrayer of the Warsaw Ghetto. Yosef Andrei Shirinsky was born Yosef Shinkman to a Jewish family in Poland. From an early age, he sought to distance himself from his roots, changing his name to Yosef Andrei Shirinsky after serving in the Russian army during World War I. By adopting a Polish-sounding name, he hoped to escape the discrimination faced by Jews and fully integrate into Polish society. When the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, Shirinsky found himself under German occupation. In 1940, he was appointed head of the Jewish ghetto police in the Warsaw Ghetto. This police force was a controversial body made up of Jews who worked under Nazi control to enforce German orders within the ghetto. Their duties included rounding up fellow Jews for deportation to concentration camps. Shirinsky quickly became an enforcer of Nazi policies. In August 1942, during the mass deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto to the Treblinka extermination camp, he oversaw the removal of 254,000 Jews. These deportations were among the deadliest phases of the Holocaust in Warsaw, where entire families were packed into cattle cars and sent to their deaths. Shirinsky executed his duties with precision, ensuring that the trains were filled according to Nazi quotas. The Jewish underground viewed Shirinsky as a traitor and marked him for assassination. In August 1942, an attempt was made on his life. He was shot by a resistance fighter, but survived, continuing to collaborate with the Nazis. His survival further enraged the Jewish resistance, who saw him as a symbol of betrayal. In January 1943, as the deportations escalated and the ghetto faced total destruction, Shirinsky ingested cyanide, ending his life. He had played a central role in the mass deportations and the dismantling of the Warsaw Ghetto. His suicide came just months before the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, a bold resistance effort by those who remained in the ghetto. Number 8. Adam Chernikov, the reluctant leader of the Warsaw Ghetto. Adam Chernikov was a man thrust into an impossible position. Born in 1880 in Warsaw, Poland, Chernikov was an engineer by trade, known for his dedication to his work and his family. He lived a quiet and respectable life, far removed from the horrors that would later define his final days. When the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, the Jewish population of Warsaw was rounded up and confined to a ghetto, an overcrowded, walled-off section of the city where hunger, disease, and death became daily realities. Chernikov, like many other Jewish leaders, was ordered by the Nazis to head the Judenrat, or Jewish Council, in the Warsaw Ghetto. This council was made up of 24 members and served as an intermediary between the Nazi authorities and the Jewish population. At first, Chernikov believed that his role would allow him to protect the ghetto's inhabitants. He thought he could negotiate with the Nazis to improve conditions and shield the most vulnerable. But the reality of his position became clear when the Nazis ordered the Judenrat to oversee the deportation of Jews from the ghetto. These deportations, framed as resettlements, were, in truth, one-way trips to extermination camps like Treblinka. Under direct orders from his Nazi overseers, Chernikov was forced to comply with a horrifying quota. 6,000 Jews deported every day. Men, women, children, all were sent to their deaths, often under the guise of relocation to labor camps. Chernikov oversaw this grim process, though his position gave him no real power to resist or refuse. Chernikov also played a role in appointing Yosef Andrei Shirinsky as the head of the Warsaw Ghetto Police, further entangling him in the machinery of deportation and death. The Ghetto Police, tasked with rounding up Jews for deportation, became a hated symbol of collaboration and betrayal. According to the Warsaw Diary of Adam Chernikov, a harrowing first-hand account of life in the ghetto, Chernikov desperately tried to negotiate with the Nazis for exceptions. He pleaded for the lives of orphans, hoping to save children from deportation. His requests were coldly denied. The Nazis even took his wife and thousands of others hostage to ensure his compliance. The emotional toll on Chernikov was immense. Trapped in a role that made him complicit in the deaths of his own people, he became increasingly overwhelmed by guilt and despair. On July 23, 1942, as the mass deportations continued, Chernikov made a final desperate decision. He ingested cyanide in his office, ending his life. Before his death, Chernikov left behind a note for his family. In it, he explained that suicide was the only way to escape the unbearable weight of his position. His death was a silent protest, a way to remove himself from the machinery of genocide he had been forced to operate. Adam Chernikov's story is preserved in his diary, a haunting record of the impossible choices and unbearable moral dilemmas faced by Jewish leaders under Nazi rule. Number 7. Chaim Mordecai Rumkowski, the king of the Lodz Ghetto. Chaim, Mordecai Rumkowski, a man both reviled and pitied, was one of the most controversial figures of the Holocaust. Born in Poland in 1877, Rumkowski had spent much of his life as an insurance agent and the director of an orphanage in Lodz. His life took a dramatic turn when the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939 and confined the Jewish population of Lodz to a ghetto. In this isolated, overcrowded prison, Rumkowski became the head of the Jewish Council of Elders, a position that gave him immense power but also forced him to make impossible choices. As the head of the Jewish Council, Rumkowski held near total control over the Lodz ghetto. His authority extended to food distribution, labor assignments, and even the ghetto's internal currency, called Kayamki, which bore his own image. He was often referred to as King Kayam, though many added the Terrible to his title, reflecting the resentment and fear he inspired among the ghetto's residents. Rumkowski believed that survival could be achieved through productivity. He turned the ghetto into an industrial hub, producing goods for the German war effort. His strategy was based on the hope that if the Jews proved themselves valuable to the Nazis as workers, they might avoid deportation to the death camps. But this hope was shattered as the Nazis intensified their plans for the final solution. In 1942, the Nazis demanded the deportation of 20,000 children, elderly, and sick individuals from the ghetto. Rumkowski, faced with the horrifying task of complying with this order, delivered one of the most infamous speeches of the Holocaust, known as the "Give Me Your Children" speech. Standing before a crowd of terrified residents, he pleaded, "A grievous blow has struck the ghetto. They are asking us to give up the best we possess, the children and the elderly. I must stretch out my hands and beg. Brothers and sisters, hand them over to me. Fathers and mothers, give me your children." His words, delivered under duress, haunt history. Rumkowski tried to justify his actions, believing that by sacrificing the most vulnerable, he could save the rest of the ghetto. But to many, his cooperation with the Nazis made him complicit in the deaths of thousands. The deportations continued. Over time, more than 200,000 Jews from the Lodz ghetto were sent to extermination camps, primarily Auschwitz. Despite his efforts to make the ghetto indispensable, Rumkowski's strategy ultimately failed. In August 1944, as the Nazis liquidated the ghetto, Rumkowski and his family were deported to Auschwitz along with the remaining residents. There, his past caught up with him. Rumkowski was beaten to death by fellow Jewish inmates, many of whom held him personally responsible for the loss of their children, parents, and loved ones. Chaim Mordecai. Rumkowski's legacy remains one of the most debated and tragic of the Holocaust. Some see him as a man crushed by impossible circumstances, trying to save his people through pragmatism. Others view him as a self-serving dictator who wielded his power at the expense of his fellow Jews. His life and actions continue to provoke difficult questions about morality, survival, and the price of compromise in the face of unimaginable evil. Number 6. Alfred Nsig, the betrayer of the Jewish underground. Alfred Nsig's life was a paradox, one marked by intellectual brilliance but tainted by betrayal. Born in 1864 in Galicia, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Nsig was a man of many talents. He studied law, science, and art, and became known as a writer, sculptor, and social thinker. Early in his life, he championed Jewish assimilation, encouraging Jews to embrace Polish culture and identity in hopes of fostering acceptance. However, Nsig's idealistic vision for assimilation faltered when he realized that Polish society largely rejected Jews, seeing them as outsiders regardless of their cultural or national loyalties. Disillusioned, he turned to Zionism, becoming a vocal advocate for the creation of a Jewish homeland. But Nsig's legacy would ultimately be defined not by his intellectual contributions, but by his betrayal during one of history's darkest chapters. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Nsig was already an elderly man in his mid-70s. The Jewish population in Warsaw, confined to the ghetto, lived under the constant threat of deportation and death. During this time, Nsig made a shocking decision. He became an undercover agent for the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police. Nsig's role was to gather intelligence on the Jewish underground resistance movements within the Warsaw Ghetto. These resistance groups, operating in secrecy, were vital to efforts to sabotage Nazi operations and protect Jewish lives. By working as a Gestapo informant, Nsig betrayed the very people fighting to save their community. He produced regular reports for his Nazi handlers, detailing the activities of underground leaders, secret meeting places, and plans for resistance. In return, Nsig was granted certain protections, including a Gestapo identity card, which allowed him to move freely and avoid deportation. This card gave him access to Nazi officials while shielding him from the fate that awaited so many of his fellow Jews. Nsig's duplicity did not go unnoticed. The Jewish underground eventually uncovered his treachery, confirming that he was feeding sensitive information to the Gestapo. On February 22, 1943, members of the Jewish underground confronted Nsig and executed him. After his death, incriminating evidence was found in his home, including a Gestapo identity card and a list of Jews involved in anti-Nazi activities. These documents confirmed the extent of his betrayal, showing how deeply he had collaborated with the Nazis at the expense of his own people. Alfred Nsig's actions remain a stark example of the devastating choices some individuals made under Nazi rule. At the time of his death, he was 78 years old, a man whose long life ended not in honor or dignity, but in betrayal and execution at the hands of those he had wronged. Number 5. Abraham Ganczwijk, the kingpin of Group 13. In the shadowy, crumbling streets of the Warsaw Ghetto, Abraham Ganczwijk rose to prominence, a man who thrived on betrayal and greed. Born in Poland, Ganczwijk was an ambitious figure who viewed chaos as an opportunity. While many struggled to survive the horrors of Nazi occupation, he saw a chance to elevate himself, even if it meant stepping over the bodies of his own people. When the Nazis confined Jews to the Warsaw Ghetto, Ganczwijk emerged as an outspoken supporter of collaboration. He believed that aligning with the Germans was the only way to survive the war. To Ganczwijk, resistance was futile. He claimed that the Nazis were unstoppable, and that working with them might spare lives, or at least his own. This self-serving philosophy set him apart and made him one of the most despised figures in the ghetto. Ganczwijk didn't just collaborate, he built an empire. He formed a notorious gang called Group 13, a collection of men who became infamous as the Jewish Gestapo. Under Nazi orders, Group 13 hunted members of the Jewish underground, betrayed those who were hiding, and uncovered resistance plots. Their actions directly resulted in arrests, deportations, and deaths, solidifying Ganczwijk's reputation as a man who traded lives for power. But Ganczwijk's ambitions extended beyond mere survival. He wanted wealth, status, and control. Using Group 13 as his personal army, he dived into smuggling, extortion, and black market deals. While most people in the ghetto starved or froze, Ganczwijk lived in opulence. He had access to luxury goods, fine food, and comforts that were unimaginable for the majority of the ghetto's residents. Other Jewish leaders, like Adam Chernikov, detested Ganczwijk. Chernikov, who himself faced impossible moral choices as the head of the Warsaw Ghetto Council, described Ganczwijk as a vile and self-serving man. Even among those collaborating with the Nazis, Ganczwijk's actions stood out for their sheer cruelty and greed. At one point, Ganczwijk even tried to overthrow Chernikov. Angling to take over the council, and gain even more power. But his attempt failed, leaving him to continue ruling his criminal empire instead. The Nazis allowed Ganschweich to operate freely as long as he delivered results. He provided information on resistance fighters, exposed underground networks, and helped suppress uprisings. To them, he was a useful tool, but nothing more. Ganschweich, for all his wealth and influence, remained expendable. Within the ghetto, the Jewish underground had had enough. They sentenced him to death for his betrayals, determined to end the reign of the Jewish Gestapo. Yet, Ganschweich managed to elude them. Whether through bribes, informants, or sheer luck, he escaped their grasp time and again. By 1943, as the Nazis moved toward liquidating the Warsaw Ghetto entirely, Ganschweich's luck began to run out. The exact circumstances of his death are unclear, shrouded in the chaos of those final days. Some say he was killed by the resistance, others believe he fell out of favor with the Nazis and met his end at their hands. What is certain is that his life of greed, betrayal, and opportunism ended in the very destruction he once thought he could avoid. Abraham Ganschweich remains one of the most notorious figures of the Holocaust, a man who used desperation as a ladder to climb toward his own twisted version of success, only to find that the top offered no escape from the horrors he helped create. Number 4. Ans van Dijk, the betrayer of Dutch Jews. Ans van Dijk was born in 1905 to Jewish parents in the Netherlands. She lived an unremarkable life in Amsterdam, running a hat shop and blending seamlessly into the fabric of Dutch society. But her ordinary existence was torn apart when the Nazis invaded the Netherlands in 1940, bringing with them the horrors of persecution. Like many Jews, Van Dijk's life became a desperate fight for survival, but the choices she made to save herself would ultimately seal her place in history as one of the most notorious collaborators of the Holocaust. Van Dijk's fall into collaboration began when she was arrested in 1943. The Gestapo offered her a terrible bargain: work for them or face deportation. Facing the fear of certain death, she agreed to their terms. Her task was chillingly clear: help the Nazis find Jews in hiding and infiltrate the resistance. Ans van Dijk executed her role with ruthless efficiency. Posing as a friend and ally, she infiltrated Jewish resistance networks, gaining the trust of families and individuals desperate for a way to escape the Nazi grip. She promised to help secure false papers or safe passage to freedom, but instead she betrayed them. The people who trusted her were handed over to the Nazis, sent to transit camps like Westerbork, and ultimately deported to concentration camps where most were murdered. Her betrayals spared no one. Van Dijk's treachery was so thorough that she even turned on her own family. Her brother and his wife believed she was helping them escape, but instead were captured and deported because of her actions. Such cold-blooded decisions reveal the depth of her collaboration and the lengths to which she went to secure her own survival. By the end of the war, Van Dijk had become responsible for the arrests of 145 Jews and the deaths of 85. Her name became synonymous with betrayal within the Jewish community in the Netherlands. In 1945, as the war came to an end, Van Dijk fled to The Hague, where she tried to disappear. She was living with a woman in a romantic relationship when she was finally arrested by Dutch authorities. Her trial began in June 1945, and the charges against her were severe. She was accused of 23 counts of treason, all linked to her role in betraying Jews to the Nazis. Van Dijk pleaded guilty to all charges, offering little defense for her actions. Despite her confessions, she attempted to avoid execution. She appealed her sentence, converted to Christianity, and even sought clemency, but her efforts were in vain. The Dutch government upheld her death sentence. On January 14, 1948, Ans van Dijk was executed by firing squad, becoming one of the few women to face such a punishment in post-war Europe. While some scholars have debated whether Van Dijk was also a victim, arguing that her initial collaboration stemmed from coercion, her extensive betrayals, particularly of her own family, have left her legacy deeply tarnished. She remains a symbol of how fear and survival instincts can lead to decisions that destroy not only others, but also one's own humanity. Number 3. Stella Goldschlag, the Blonde Poison. Stella Goldschlag was a woman whose beauty and charm masked a dark and treacherous role in the Holocaust. Born in 1922 to Jewish parents in Berlin, she grew up as a bright, confident young woman with dreams of a normal life. But the Nazi rise to power shattered any hope of normalcy, and her story would become one of betrayal, desperation, and an unfathomable moral descent. Stella attended a Jewish school in Berlin where she was well-liked and known for her striking looks. With her blonde hair, blue eyes, and Germanic features, she hardly conformed to the Nazis' racial stereotypes of Jews. Her appearance made her stand out, and, tragically, it would become a weapon that the Nazis used to their advantage. As the persecution of Jews intensified, Stella and her parents attempted to escape Germany. They were caught and arrested. During her detention, the Nazis discovered that Stella had a deep knowledge of Berlin's Jewish underground. She had connections with many families and individuals who had gone into hiding, and the Gestapo saw her as an invaluable asset. Stella's torture began almost immediately. The Nazis knew how much she loved her parents, and they used this against her. They promised to spare their lives if she agreed to become a catcher, a person tasked with identifying and betraying Jews in hiding. Stella gave in, hoping to save her family. At first she cooperated under duress, but her role as a catcher quickly evolved. The Gestapo offered her incentives, including 300 Reichsmarks for every Jew she betrayed. She began actively seeking out hidden Jews, using her looks and charm to gain their trust. Posing as a sympathetic ally, she promised food, safe passage, or accommodations, only to deliver her victims to the Gestapo. Her betrayal extended far and wide. It is estimated that Stella Goldschlag was directly responsible for the capture of nearly 3,000 Jews, most of whom were deported to concentration camps. The Nazis, impressed by her efficiency, nicknamed her Blonde Poison. Even after her parents were sent to a concentration camp and killed, Stella continued her work. By this point, her motivations were no longer clear. Some say she acted out of fear, knowing that stopping would mean her own arrest. Others argue that greed and power played a role in her ongoing collaboration. Stella's good looks and cunning made her particularly effective. She could easily pass as a non-Jew, and many trusted her, never suspecting that she was leading them to their deaths. Her actions made her one of the most infamous collaborators of the Holocaust. When the war ended, Stella's crimes came to light, and she was arrested. In 1946, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison for her collaboration with the Nazis. Upon her release, she attempted to rebuild her life, but the stigma of her betrayal followed her everywhere. She converted to Christianity and became an outspoken anti-Semite, a bitter irony given her role during the Holocaust. Her later years were marked by isolation and despair. In 1994, at the age of 72, Stella Goldschlag committed suicide by jumping out of a window. Number 2. Rolf Isaacson, the master of betrayal. Rolf Isaacson was a man whose actions during the Holocaust made him one of the most feared Jewish collaborators in Nazi Germany. He offered his services to the Gestapo willingly, becoming a catcher, a person tasked with locating Jews in hiding and turning them over to the Nazis. Unlike many collaborators who acted under duress or out of fear, Isaacson seemed to revel in his role. He even bragged that he could fill an entire train with Jews for deportation. Isaacson possessed a particular talent that made him invaluable to the Gestapo: his skill in forging documents. In Nazi-controlled Germany, Forged papers were a lifeline for Jews trying to escape persecution. Many turned to Isaacson for help, believing he could provide the documents they needed to flee. But instead of helping, he betrayed them. Using their trust as a weapon, he handed them over to the Gestapo. His effectiveness increased exponentially after he married Stella Goldschlag, another notorious catcher who used her beauty and charm to lure Jews into traps. Together they became a lethal duo, feared throughout Berlin. Mr. and Mrs. Isaacson were so successful in their collaboration that they often outperformed the Gestapo itself in capturing Jews. Their methods were as cruel as they were innovative. According to Peter Wyden, who documented the couple's activities, the Isaacsons developed elaborate schemes to expose hidden Jews. They would infiltrate resistance networks, pretending to be allies, and gather information about safe houses and escape routes. It didn't matter to Rolf Isaacson whether the victims were strangers or childhood friends. Betrayal was simply part of his routine. The couple's reign of terror was devastating. Rolf Isaacson is estimated to have been directly responsible for the capture and deaths of over 2,000 Jews. Many of his victims ended up on trains bound for Auschwitz or other extermination camps. The Isaacsons' actions left a trail of fear and destruction in their wake. They became infamous among the Jewish community, symbols of the ultimate betrayal. The fear of being discovered by them was so great that their very names evoked dread. Rolf Isaacson's story is a chilling reminder of how far some were willing to go to ensure their survival, or, in his case, to feed his greed and sense of power at the expense of thousands of lives. Number 1. Moshe Maran, the leader who played God. Moshe Maran's name stands out among Holocaust collaborators as one of the most controversial figures of that tragic era. Born in Poland, Maran's leadership during the Holocaust was marked by decisions that cost the lives of thousands and raised profound moral questions. His story is a chilling account of power, compromise, and the haunting consequences of choosing who lives and who dies. When the Nazis invaded Poland, Moshe Maran presented himself to them as a willing collaborator. Confident and self-assured, he claimed he could control the Jewish population of the Sosnowiec region. The Nazis accepted his offer, installing him as the leader of the central office of the Jewish Council in East Upper Silesia. This position gave Maran authority over nearly 100,000 Jews, a level of power that few Jewish leaders held during the Holocaust. Maran believed that strict obedience to Nazi orders would save lives. He rationalized his cooperation as a way to protect as many Jews as possible, but his decisions often revealed a troubling willingness to sacrifice others to maintain his position and ensure his own survival. In one of his most infamous actions, Maran was asked by the Nazis to select 25,000 Jews for deportation. Without hesitation, he complied, reasoning that by sacrificing a minority, he could save the majority. This cold calculation became the cornerstone of his leadership, prioritizing numbers over lives. For Maran, it was a grim equation of survival, but for the people under his authority, it was betrayal. Working closely with the Jewish ghetto police, Maran cracked down on underground resistance efforts within the ghetto. He viewed the resistance as a threat to his strategy of compliance, believing that defiance would provoke harsher Nazi reprisals. Maran personally signed execution warrants for resistance fighters and others who challenged Nazi authority. His cooperation with the Nazis extended so far that even other collaborators viewed him as ruthless. Despite his unwavering obedience, Maran's belief that compliance would save lives proved tragically misguided. In 1943, the Nazis deported him to Auschwitz, the very destination to which he had sent countless others. His power and cooperation could not save him. Like so many others, Moshe Maran perished in the gas chambers. Moshe Maran's legacy is one of deep controversy. Was he a man trying to save his people through impossible choices, or a collaborator blinded by his own authority? His decisions and their devastating consequences remain a haunting example of the moral dilemmas faced by Jewish leaders under Nazi rule. Thank you for joining us on this unsettling journey into one of the darkest chapters of human history. These stories of collaboration remind us how extreme circumstances can push people to unimaginable choices, testing the very essence of humanity. If today's episode gave you pause or left you with questions, we invite you to reflect, discuss, and explore more. History is full of layers and complexities, and it's only by uncovering them that we can truly understand the past. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Creepshow. Share your thoughts and let us know what stories you'd like us to delve into next. Until then, remember, sometimes the shadows hide more than just monsters. Stay curious, stay cautious, and we'll see you next time.